Hello, and you're welcome to the Free State of Seven. And I am your bastion of free thinking finance, Matthew Mills. And in our latest Seven lecture, we're going to take a look at the midterm elections that are going on over the pond and ask ourselves, what on earth are they doing and why should I care anyway? And if you've been following the news at all, then you'll have seen that there are midterm elections going on over in the States, which, having fought fiercely for their independence from Britain and for the Crown, have preserved many of our customs and habits, including the perennial ability to queue. Now, to really understand what's going on, you've got to have some historical perspective. So, prior to July 1776, the Americas were British colonies, not to mention subjects of the Crown. Now, the War of Independence changed all of that. The colonials had become increasingly resentful of taxation from a remote legislature, itself subject to the divine right of an unelected head of state, the king, within which they had no voice, no representation whatsoever. And you might have heard the term no taxation without representation, which was the clarion call for the independence movement. Now, calls for change were greeted as sedition in England, and failure to reach a compromise between the New World and the Old ultimately exploded into the War of Independence. Now, after 8 years of fighting, the American colonies wrested their independence from England. We finally let the colonies go, or at least we loaned them the states for the time being. And the founding fathers promptly set about establishing a basis for government. And this is enshrined in what's called the Constitution. Now, the principles and precepts were effectively that all men were created equal, thereby in the authority of divine right, and thereby a king, and that government of the people should be by the people for themselves. And on that basis, the United States of America, as we know it, came into existence. The system of government that emerged in the United States is delivered through an architecture specifically designed to apply balances and checks to the application of political will and power. The president, who's the most visible face of government, acts as the chief executive for the entire country. Now, while you've got this very powerful individual who's been elected into office, the Americans will not have a king, no siree Bob. So the president can't just do as they please. And their agenda has to be agreed by what's called a House of Representatives before it can pass into law. And the House consists of the Senate, with 2 elected representatives from each state. And then alongside the Senate, you've got Congress, which has representatives from each of the congressional districts, which are the subdivisions of the state. So if you're looking at this in England, it's a bit like the boroughs that make up the counties of the United Kingdom. And although there are only 2 senators from each state, there can be loads and loads of congressmen. And I think California, which has the greatest, has something like 53, whereas Alaska, because there's nobody there, just has 1. Then the final piece of the puzzle, while both the Senate and Congress must agree policies before they can pass into law, these must then be ratified by the Supreme Court to ensure there's no infringement of the Constitution. And you've got basically a series of judges here, 7 of them, who are appointed by the president, and they're there just to make sure that any laws don't actually contravene the principles and precepts that are enshrined in the Constitution. And this basically is democracy in action. Now, that all said, the Constitution recognises that power in perpetuity is not in the interest of democracy, because you could end up with a despot who won't let go of power. And we all know who I'm referring to there. A president is elected every 4 years, and with one notable exception, and there's a prize for anyone who can guess what it is, they may only serve 2 terms. Congressmen and senators are also elected every 4 years, midway through the presidential term of office. Just to make things more complicated, congressmen can serve 2 years and up to 6 terms, while senators can serve up to 2 terms and 6 years. If you're not confused yet, you will be. The positioning of the midterms, however, that's the important point, is specifically designed to offer a plebiscite or a popularity contest on the incumbent president, and essentially further limits their power. So if you don't like the incumbent president and what he's doing, you can exercise your political power and show how you feel about it during the midterms. So while government of the people, for the people, by the people might appear a little bit complex, the party politics at least present the appearance of overarching simplicity. And there are basically only two parties. You've got the Republicans and the Democrats. Representatives will almost invariably be a member of one or other parties, a few independents, but far too few to be significant. And each party will themselves select a presidential candidate that represents their agenda. The current incumbent is a Democrat, and Mr. Trump was a Republican. Now, broadly speaking, the Republicans are associated with a fairly conservative agenda, low taxation, and supportive of commercial interests, while the Democrats historically tend to be a little bit more left-leaning, committed to higher public spending and therefore tax, whilst supportive of greater state intervention through regulation, which tends to be the sort of the red tape that mires business activity and increases costs. So after our whistle-stop tour through the impact of the Constitution, it's time for a quick attention break. And as if the system of government wasn't exhausting enough, it transpires that the process of reaching the design of the United States flag was fairly tortuous as well. And they took 27 goes to actually get to it. Another startling statistic there, brought to you by SE7EN. And the question that's probably bubbling up in you at this point is, so what? Well, the movements of political power in the United States matter. They do so because they set the tone for the entire planet, like it or not. The president presides oversight to the largest economy in the world, and that makes up more than half of total capitalization. All the money in the world and all the transactions and machinations, over 50% of it is basically the United States alone. This financial strength also underpins much of global trade, because most of that is actually conducted in dollars, which will be underwritten by United States banks. And as if that wasn't enough, these pervasive national interests are then projected and protected by unrivaled military might, the United States being the new Roman Empire, basically. So while sometimes it seems remote, obscure, and even strange to those of us who look at over the pond at the colonies, developments on Capitol Hill in Washington impact us and our investments in a very real and very tangible way. So what about the midterms, I hear you say? Well, the midterm elections are important because they determine the legislative power of the president. A president may find themselves facing a House of Representatives dominated by the opposition party. From a legislative perspective, this effectively renders the chief executive pretty much powerless. A Democratic president is not going to get a Republican-dominated House to agree to their agenda, basically, and pass any laws. The midterm elections can have also a very important impact on investment markets. A positive result for the Republicans in the House of Representatives is likely to be perceived by investors as supportive of business through lower taxation and regulatory burdens, and therefore investment markets will tend to respond positively. And there you are. That's why the midterm elections in the United States actually matter, no matter where you are on the globe. But what have we learned? Well, first and foremost, the United States system of government is based on what's called a constitution, which was set up after the War of Independence. Any laws that the president wants to put in place, the chief executive of the country, must be agreed by a House of Representatives, which has elected members from all of the state. So representation for that taxation. There are two main parties. You've got the Republicans and the Democrats, and there are elections midway through the president's 4-year term to return those individuals to the House of Representatives. With a Congress dominated by Republicans, a Democratic president, the situation it looks like we have now, is pretty much powerless to actually pursue their agenda. So for the next 2 years of their term, it's not quite certain how much they're actually going to be able to push through as law. However, that all said, while it's not necessarily good for the chap in the Oval Office, the results are broadly positive for markets and investors, because a Republican majority is seen as largely supportive of business interests and therefore stock markets and investors. And as we head off into twilight's last gleaming, it just remains for me to give a big shout out to all of our colonial friends under the Star Spangled Banner, and just to remind you that this video is intended to inform, to educate, and to entertain, and most certainly does not represent advice in any way, shape, or form. And on that note, we'll see you next time.